A win for individual freedoms. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. In today's topic, what's taking place in Virginia? Parents have just received a huge win from the Republican-dominated legislature in Richmond. And from Governor Glenn Youngkin. We'll get into that in just a second. I want to give a heads up to Bold and Blunt's latest platform, which is Edify, edify.app/podcasts. It's the place to go for faith-based podcasts. Check it out. Download Bold and Blunt there, subscribe to Bold and Blunt there, or go to WashingtonTimes.com and subscribe to Bold and Blunt. But make sure you get your daily dose of faith-based listening because it's dark times, it's dismal times, and the wins are few and far between. So you do need to edify yourselves to fight the dark forces of socialism that are seeping into America, but not today, into Virginia. Listen to this. Governor Glenn Youngkin just signed into law a bill. Remember that? Bills, pieces of legislation. We've been living and suffering under executive orders and unconstitutional mandates for so long now, you may have forgotten how the constitutional process is supposed to work in America. But here in Virginia, which I am a resident of this Commonwealth, here in Virginia, they actually put forward a piece of legislation to underscore the authority of parents to decide whether or not their children should wear face masks in public schools. And the governor signed that bill into law. Listen to his remarks.
Children have not only suffered learning loss, they've suffered relationship loss. And now's our chance to give all parents the rights to make decisions that we know they have.
See, right there, that is the key phrase, to remind yourself that we know they have. It's great when Republicans, when conservatives, when right-leaning politicians talk about individual authorities. That is something that every politician should recognize and discuss. But too often, the left, the Democrat Party, forgets about that because in the Democrats' mind, it's all about collectivism. It's all about Marxism and socialism and doing for the greater good at the expense of individualism. But conservatives, Republicans, sometimes get on this dangerous type of speaking tract in which they talk about returning individual rights to the individual, but forgetting to also tack on to that the idea that it's rights that were wrongly taken, wrongly seized in the first place. Government can't give or give back what government does not rightly own or what government was not supposed to own in the first place. So I appreciate that Glenn Youngkin made that extra effort to underscore that these parental rights that he just, air quote, gave back to parents were rights that parents never should have lost in the first place. Back to his remarks.
But to put it into law. And I want to be clear. I am so proud that today we, in fact, are coming together. Look at this. Children, parents, legislators, a governor, a lieutenant governor, an attorney general, the first lady, cabinet members. This is not about any individual. It is about us. Yes. It's about us. Today we are reestablishing and restoring power back to parents.
There you have it, the sound of freedom, the sound of a win for individuals, for parental rights. A major loss for the far left teachers' unions that still to this day are pushing for kids to wear face masks in public schools, not just in Virginia, around the nation. Where is the science? It's crazy to me that Democrat governors reading the tea leaves of the political world and seeing that they're going to get trounced, that their party is going to get trounced in the midterms. But it's interesting and odd to me that Democrat governors are rolling back things like face mask mandates. And let's put mandates in air quotes too, because these aren't constitutional pieces of legislation. These aren't constitutional laws. These are just dictators using the coronavirus to issue one decree after another as if they have the authority to do that. So the mandates all along have been mandates in air quotes because they've only been mandates insofar as citizens have allowed them to become mandates. But they're not laws. Mandates are not the same as laws. But let's go back to my original point. It's interesting to me that some of these same Democrat governors that are reeling back face mask, air quote, mandates, end air quotes, on many of the citizens in their respective states are also simultaneously, at the same time, keeping face mask mandates on kids in schools, at least for a certain period of time. Instead of just saying, no more face mask, air quote, mandates in my state at all, they're saying, well, face mask mandates, air quote, mandates, will be lifted for adults in dining establishments, in places of business, in government offices and so forth, but not in public schools until such and such a date, not until the end of February, not until the first week of March. Why? Where is the science on this? There is no science, and there hasn't been science with this coronavirus for a very long time. Wear the face mask if you want. Force your kids to wear the face mask if you as a parent want. But know this, the science of the face mask and that whole phrase, face masks work. Define work. Define what you mean by the word work. Or at least do some research to understand what it's meant by the word work. Because if the phrase face masks work mean to you that face masks prevent the spread of the coronavirus and all its various variants, then they don't work. And if face masks work mean to you that by wearing the face mask, it's a wall against getting the coronavirus yourself. In other words, whoever wears the face mask is guaranteed of not getting the coronavirus. Well, the face mask doesn't work either, because there are no studies showing that this indeed worked on either of those 2 points. There are studies showing the exact opposite, in fact. The whole problem with the phrase face masks work is that it kind of is undefined, unclear what's meant by that. Look, if you are a doctor in an emergency room performing surgery on a patient, and you have nurses who tie a face mask onto your face, and your fingers never actually touch the face mask yourself, and you are performing surgery in a room that has been sterilized for surgery, and you are not pulling your face mask down to eat during surgery, and you're not pulling your face mask down under your nose so you can better breathe, and your face mask doesn't have gaps all along the side, and you're not taking your face mask off when you go out into the room into the waiting room to talk to the patient's family members and stuffing it in your pocket and then giving the update on how surgery's going, and then going back into the surgery room and pulling that face mask out of your pocket and tying it back on your face. But rather, you have a nurse put a clean face mask on you and you never touch it before you go back to your surgical procedures. Well, in that respect, face masks can indeed work, right? They are a layer of protection for the patient to keep any sort of pollutants from your body entering into the air in the surgery room that can enter then into the patient's body. But we don't live in sterilized rooms, right? And we don't all have nurses following us around and tying face masks on our faces for us and making sure there are no gaps on the side and chastising us whenever we try and touch the face mask and preventing us from taking off the face mask when we eat and stuffing it into our pockets or throwing it into the glove box in our car. We don't have nurses following us around. And we don't live in sterilized settings. So in that respect, how could it even have been argued in the first place that face masks work? Especially for children, the ones least likely to suffer from the coronavirus. Thankfully, Virginia has seen the light. Virginia's Republicans, and there was one Democrat, Chad Peterson, down in Richmond, who said enough of the nonsense, that he would cross political aisles and sign on to legislation that allowed parents to choose, or that made clear parents possess the authority to choose whether or not their children wear face masks in public schools, regardless of what the leftist school boards and the tyrants on certain school boards in Virginia say. There is now actual legislation underscoring parental rights. So that means in the next election, in the next governor's election in Virginia, if a Democrat manages to squeak into office again and Democrats manage to take over Richmond again in both houses and try and executively order that children for, say, flu season ought to wear face masks in public school systems. And the public school systems run roughshod with that advisement and try and mandate that children have to wear face masks. This legislation means, nope, sorry, no can do.
Establishing our expectations that we will get back to normal. And this is the path. And this is the path.
And this is the path. Isn't it the path? Anthony Fauci doesn't want it to be the path. There are plenty in the Democrat Party who don't want this return to normalcy to be the path. There are teachers unions who are screaming, no more return to this path. We have to have a new normal. We have to have a new normal that includes face masking and plastic shields for. That's another issue. What's up with the plastic shields? Is there a trend of spitting all the time when people talk? What's up with the plastic shields? But that's what the teachers unions want. That's what the left wants. And here in Virginia, it's a win-win-win, a win for freedom, and it's refreshing. It's refreshing to see the pendulum swinging the other way. But you know what? That's just one win, and there are a lot of battles left to fight. My guest today, CNS News Editor-in-Chief Terry Jeffrey. He also writes a column for the Washington Times, and he served as a former editor of Human Events. So he is here today to discuss not just face mask mandates, but the vaccine mandates, vaccine passports, and all the coronavirus crazy that has gone on in the last 2+ years, and talk about where that's going to lead in America. Are we going to return to normalcy or not? Terry, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So I'm looking at headlines, as I'm sure you're watching too, out of Canada about the great trucker protest and the crackdown now from the government. What do you see as the potentials for such a protest and crackdown to take place here in America?
Well, I think that most Americans believe that they have a freedom to decide what goes in their body and whether or not they're going to take a shot or not. I think we saw some serious reaction when Joe Biden was trying to unilaterally order a vaccine mandate. So I think that to the degree that politicians in the United States of America try and force people to take a vaccine, it's going to be a problem.
You know, one of the things that has concerned me most over the last couple of years is this sort of flip where America, the country of individualism, is turning into America, the country of collectivism. And most recently, we heard Joe Biden talking about how, yes, you have your individual rights, but not when it impacts the health of others. And he made that argument in context of pushing the vaccines on American citizens who are reluctant to take them. What's your response to this sort of flip in the theme of America that's taken place?
Well, it's pretty dramatic. I mean, if you think about it, mandating for the President of the United States to unilaterally declare that someone in this country has to get a vaccine for any disease is meaning that a single individual, in this case Joe Biden, thinks that he can force an American to undergo a medical procedure. Now, a COVID vaccine shot may not seem like a significant medical procedure, but it is a medical procedure, and it's a foot in the door. And if you look around the world and you look at regimes where you have, for example, in China, a communist government that forces people to abort their babies, that this is a slippery slope that can go a long way. I mean, we're having an Olympics right now in a country that has a coercive population control policy, and it's not something that people are discussing when the Olympics are going on. So it's not a fantasy, and it's not unbelievable that if you empower politicians or the government to force people to undergo medical procedures, that you can pretty soon end up having the government control a great deal of your life.
You know, you brought up China, and I feel comfortable asking you this question because it's not directly tied to coronavirus, but it's tied more to Chinese policies and influence on American soil, because I know that you watch politics very closely. How much of the Democrats' insistence to keep clampdowns on individual freedoms in place due to the coronavirus do you think is related to the growing influence of China and Chinese players in American politics?
I don't know that there's a direct connection there. But, I do think that there are politicians in America, obviously, who think that they can dramatically increase the role of the government in your lives. And, unfortunately, on the healthcare front, since we established Medicare, so people who reach the age of 65 or whatever the eligible age is now, the government's going to pay for their health care, and the government has control of their health care. And then you have Medicaid, which is for people in lower income, and right now Medicaid is at an all-time high in terms of its enrollment. And the government controls your health care there. And then under Obamacare, you have subsidized health care plans. So to the degree that the government in the United States is increasing its payment for health care and its control over people's health care, it's increasing their ability to control people's lives, and I don't think it's a good thing. And to put in perspective, Medicare and Medicaid were not even enacted until 1965. So from the beginning of our country all the way through 1965, people took care of their health care independently. If you were an American in 1962 when JFK was president of the United States, the government wasn't paying for your health care. And I think we had a pretty good health care system then. Obviously, science and medical science has advanced since then. But I think that the increase in government control over our lives through health care in that intervening period is not a good thing.
You know, I watched the Obamacare debates on Capitol Hill closely, as I'm sure you did too. And didn't it seem to you like the Republicans or some in the Republican Party sort of ceded the debate to Democrats about the whole healthcare is a human right thing, which opened the door for government control of healthcare?
Right, and I think there were some very serious issues that got some attention but should have gotten more. I mean, for example, one of the things that it actually wasn't in the Obamacare legislation was silent on this, and I think it was a strategic move on the Democrats that it was on the question of contraceptives. And the Obama administration, HHS, issued its famous mandate that people would have to buy contraceptives up to and including abortifacients. And there was a lawsuit, obviously, over that. It wasn't very clearly settled in my mind. But if you think about that, literally you had the government attempting to tell people that they had to pay for the extermination of a human life.
Yeah.
And that was litigated in this country, and that was a national debate in this country under Obama. And so I think that that's a real illustration of where you're going when you see control over the healthcare system of the government. Like I said, in China, they have coercive abortion. In the United States, we had a president and his administration trying to force people to buy abortifacient drugs.
You know, sometimes I think that too often in politics, even the good guys, the conservatives, play a little bit more whack-a-mole or trying to put out fires than they do thinking long-term strategy, which is where the Democrats are very clever at forging their paths. And one of the issues I see tied to this coronavirus as a long-term concern that I think we're not talking enough about is contact tracing and the government surveillance that will usher in. Are you aware of the pitfalls of contact tracing? What is your response to that?
Well, you know, to make the China analogy again,
yes,
they were reporting before the Olympics that the Chinese wanted to put devices on every athlete's phone that would track where they went.
Yep.
And the Chinese aren't allowing the athletes to travel around freely. They're in certain enclaves, bubbles, they call them, where they move around. And in China, they have a huge surveillance system. The State Department writes about this in its report on human rights in China, and also in its report on religious freedom in China, where they have surveillance cameras that have not only facial recognition on it. So if the Chinese government is monitoring your movement, they can tell who you are from your face on the camera they have monitoring you. They also have gait monitoring systems that they're developing. So, you know, in China we see the extreme, but to the degree that the government starts tracking people in America, I think it's a very bad thing. Another front on that, by the way, is there are people who want to tax you for every mile you drive in your car. Right. Which means they'd have to put a sensing device in your car and know everywhere your car went and where you were going and when you were going, which would, in my mind, be a severe restriction on the freedom of movement. And in my mind, one of the great things about America is the freedom of movement. I think it may be almost the most symbolic thing about America. The people who founded this country, they came across an ocean. They took huge risks to get here. When they got here, they immediately started moving west. Eventually, they got all the way to the West Coast. You know, that whole history of pioneers and people moving out into the prairie and taking care of themselves. That was one of the things that was concomitant with the freedom of movement, is as you moved west, the government was going to take care of you. If you went out and you homesteaded in Nebraska, you're going to have to take care of yourself, which I think really helped develop the spirit of what America was all about. Freedom of motion and freedom of taking care of yourself and taking care of your family. And I think that also lent momentum to the idea of community in America, where neighbors take care of each other. Not the government, but neighbors. Because they're out there living in that town on the prairie where the only people who can help you is the guy down the road. And they did. And I think that the more we move into a nation where the government is taking control of you and move away from that nation we were historically with that pioneering spirit of people taking care of themselves, their family, and their neighbors, the less free we are going to be.
I think it's interesting you bring up that about taxing by the mile traveled and the notion of America the Free being America the freely traveled as well, because over the last couple of years, I've noticed as I travel around in certain spots in America, the growing development of hot lanes where you have to have an easy pass or an electronic pass in order to access certain roads that you then pay for. Is this sort of a step toward that government surveillance of where you travel?
Well, I think it is. And in fact, if you look at some of the thoughts that have been put out by some people on the left on this, they really would like to force Americans into public transit. I mean, their ideal place would be a place where everybody rode a metro train. They all lived in apartment buildings. No one had a single family home with a yard around it and a pickup truck and another car. And so they, you know, to the degree that they can impose restrictions on you, so it makes it harder for you to drive your car and harder for you to live in your single-family home, the more it pushes us in the direction they want us to go. I'll tell you something I've written about before, and it's about where I grew up. I'm a native San Franciscan, and I grew up in Marin County, which is just north of San Francisco across the Golden Gate Bridge, and I went to school in San Francisco on the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge. So I'd commute across that bridge every day, and it was one of the few places in Northern California where there was a toll. But it was a very unique thing that most people don't know about the Golden Gate Bridge, is that it wasn't owned or built by the government. The Golden Gate Bridge was built by a private corporation that was formed by a group of counties in the North Bay, who then financed it through bonds that they got the Bank of America to put out for them, and then sold off the bonds through the toll that they charged. It had nothing to do with the government. In fact, the government wouldn't fund the building of the Golden Gate Bridge because they just paid for the building of the Bay Bridge from the East Bay into San Francisco. So I think it's highly symbolic that not only did, as Americans move west, they were pioneers and they took care of themselves, but when they absolutely got to the farthest point in the West, they built this monument to the American idea of it's not the government, it's us taking our own initiative, and that's what the Golden Gate Bridge symbolizes. Too few people know that, but it is the truth.
And the Democrats hate that. They hate self-sufficiency because they can't tap into that politically and exploit it.
Right. And what we don't want to lose is that spirit that motivated the people in the Bay Area to build the Golden Gate Bridge. I mean, nowadays everybody looks at my hometown of San Francisco as sort of a symbol of the American left, and Nancy Pelosi is its representative. And sadly, obviously, San Francisco in recent decades has moved more and more in that direction. But in its founding era, and for the first century or so of its existence as a major American city, it really was a symbol of that freedom. And I would like to hope that someday we can take it back. But that struggle that we've seen go on culturally and politically in California itself, where it went from a place where Ronald Reagan was a two-term governor to a place where Gavin Newsom is the governor, I think is quite significant.
And so is the changing shape of Boston, right? Used to be at this country's founding, it was just the stronghold of freedom and the fight against elitism, which is part of the problem today. And I just want to finish up on this note. When you speak of Nancy Pelosi, when you speak of the spirit of America, that is so lacking from what we see on the news today regarding coronavirus and COVID-19 mandates. Just look at what happened with the Super Bowl and the face mask mandates and how the elites skated on it while the rest of us peons are supposed to wear them. Can you just speak to the hypocrisy?
It was very telling. Some of the stuff that was coming out before the Super Bowl was saying masks are still going to be mandatory in Los Angeles County. They're going to hand out masks to people as they enter the stadium. And anybody who watched the Super Bowl could see very few people in the stands at the Super Bowl were wearing masks. And afterwards, when they were celebrating on the field and you had Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the NFL, up there on a stage crowded around with a bunch of people, none of them were wearing masks. And as you say, you had these elitists, these famous actors and actresses and, Hollywood personalities who were in that stadium not wearing masks. So, yes, they want to be free. And in the championship game, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, was there not wearing a mask. They want to be free. They don't want the people that they govern to be free. But yeah, I think it's also a good symbol of what we saw in the Super Bowl, that the people who are being governed want to be free, and they're not going to give in at this point to a government that wants to tell them what to do.
Yeah, I agree. And I do hope that spirit stays strong, because I think the left is going to continue to push for all the mandates that it can. Terry Jeffrey, CNS News Editor-in-Chief, and so much more. Thank you for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
What do you think? Is America returning to normal? Or are we only returning to normal in certain spots, with the common denominator being certain Republican-dominated spots? If it's the latter, vote wisely. You know where to cast your ballot. In the midterms, in the next presidential election, and you know what? Thereafter. We should send a strong message to Democrats around the nation who have used the coronavirus for political ambitions. And that message should simply be never, again. Thank you for listening. Don't forget, check out Bold and Blunt at edify.app/podcasts. And subscribe to my Washington Times newsletter, that comes out 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Go to WashingtonTimes.com, scroll to the bottom of the page where the newsletter section is, click on my name and sign up. And not only will you get all my commentaries that I write all week long, every day, but you will also get my twice weekly Bold and Blunt podcast delivered straight to your email box in time for lunch hour. You can also get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are offered. Thank you for your support. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, stay blunt, stay bold.